Welcome to today's webinar on Southwest Minnesota Arts Council's Art Study Opportunity for Youth Grants for fiscal year 2020, which for us runs from July 1st, 2019 through June 30th, 2020. I am Carolyn Koska, the Financial and Grants Administrator here at Southwest Minnesota Arts Council, or SMOC. I've got people muted right now and we'll keep you muted for most of the presentation. If you have a question, feel free to type that into the chat window that you have. You can find that with the little speech bubble icon in your top right. I will watch for any questions coming through, and I'll also stop a couple places during the presentation and unmute people if there are questions then as well. So today, first, we're going to start out and talk a little bit about the Southwest Minnesota Arts Council. We'll look at the guidelines for this grant program. We'll take you over to our website and show you what resources are available for you there. Then we'll go from there into our grant system and walk through the application. And finally, we'll finish up with talking through the steps of what happens after you have submitted your application. And then at the very end, I'll open everything up again if there's any questions or specific things you'd like to talk about with your project. So the Southwest Minnesota Arts Council, or SMOC, is a nonprofit organization committed to promoting and encouraging the development of the arts in the 18 counties of Southwest Minnesota by serving as a source of funds and technical services which enable local organizations, educational institutions, and individuals to sponsor and create and promote the arts in their communities. We cover this 18 county region down in the southwest corner of the state. We're one of 11 regional arts councils that covers the whole state of Minnesota. Our funding comes mostly from the state of Minnesota, some from their general fund, but the most of it comes from the Arts and Cultural Heritage or Legacy Fund. We also receive funding from the McKnight Foundation and from local members. Some things that we are committed to are supporting artists and arts organizations in creating, producing, and presenting high-quality arts activities, overcoming barriers to accessing high-quality arts activities, instilling the arts into the community and public life, supporting high-quality, age-appropriate arts education for all ages to develop knowledge, skills, and understanding of the arts, and supporting events and activities that represent the diverse ethnic and cultural arts traditions of the region. So some things to keep in mind, and as you're thinking about projects you may want to do, they all will need to relate in some way back to these commitments that we have. The Art Study Opportunity for Youth Grant Program is open to students who will be entering grades 5 through 12 in fall 2020, who have been permanent residents of this 18 county region for at least 6 months. So these grants are focused on providing special opportunities for students to study their art form either by mentoring with a local professional artist or attending some sort of workshop or camp that really lets them focus in on their art form. One exception to that is if a student qualifies for federal free or reduced lunches, they are able to use this opportunity to apply for funding their regular weekly lessons if they're taking piano lessons or dance lessons, something like that. Also, students attending Minnesota Public Arts High School can request costs for art supplies through this program. This is open to any art discipline. The main ones would include dance, literature, media arts, music, theater, visual arts. We've had quite a wide range of disciplines involved in these study opportunities. But keep in mind that there will be preference given to students who have some sort of experience in that art form already. So these grants are available for up to $500. And there's no cash match required, which means that as long as your total project costs $500 or less, the student will not need to put up any of their own money towards the project. Obviously, if their whole project costs more than $500, then they would need to make up that difference. Some eligibility items to be aware of. The following are not eligible for these grants. Projects that don't have an art focus, participation in a school or other organization's band or choir trip, credits or materials that are necessary to fulfill degree requirements for students, projects intended for mass market distribution or other commercial activities, projects that include self-publishing, equipment or supplies that are not specifically tied to the proposed project, activities that take place outside of Minnesota. So any study opportunity that the student would attend needs to be within Minnesota, since we are using state of Minnesota funds to fund this grant program. Also not eligible are activities for the religious socialization of the participants or audience, activities that attempt to influence any state or federal legislation, payments of debts incurred before the grant begins, or applicants with a past SMOT grant project still in progress, or a past due final report. It's a good idea to check all of our guidelines. This is just a quick overview. So there are some guidelines available specifically for this program and some general guidelines that cover all of our grant programs. So make sure to look at both of those. Later on, I will show you where you can find them on our website. Your project will need to have a start date and an end date. And your start date is the point when everything is set in motion. So things like ordering supplies, paying any fees, participating in auditions or rehearsals. So you can't spend any of the grant funds before that project's start date. If there's something that you absolutely need to spend before that date, if you have to put down a deposit for participation fees for a workshop you're registering for, you could not include the amount of that deposit in your grant project budget. So that would not be covered by grant funds. No advertising by the applicant can take place before that start date. So this would be in the case of maybe a student would put together an exhibit at the end of their study, so they couldn't advertise their own exhibit before the start date. This does not apply to any advertising that is done by whoever is coordinating the actual opportunity or workshop or camp. So with all of this in mind, the start date you choose should not be the date of your first activity or event. You need to give yourself time to register and anything else that may be involved with that. You'll also need to choose a project end date, and that's much easier to choose. Just give yourself enough time for the camp or workshop or mentorship to take place. So we have one deadline per year for this grant program. Grants applications will be due April 1st. And there's an earliest allowed project start date of May 1st. So you can't do anything towards your project or spend any funds before May 1st. Also good to note that applications need to be submitted by 4:30 p.m. on the deadline date. The grant system will not let you submit your application after that time. So good to be aware of that. I'm going to pause for a second and open up for some questions. Question that just came through. Do you have artists to recommend for students? Um, I guess you could contact our office if you had an idea of um, what kind of art form the particular student was interested in, but I guess we don't have a list available or anything. Second question, if a student has participated in this before, can they apply again? Yes, they can apply again even if they have received a grant for this in the past. They just need to make sure that they've totally finished up one grant project before reapplying. One more question. Do you have a date all students need to be finished by? All projects should be finished by June 30th of 2021. So they'll have a little over a year if they want to wait to do their project next fall, but they'd like to apply already now. That will work. I'm going to move on, but please feel free to ask any questions as we go along. So here we are over on our website. I'm going to pause again for 1 second. I see one last question come through. Does a student request funds for their travel or gas expense too? Yes, they can include that. So here we are on the Southwest Minnesota Arts Council website. From here, there are a couple of places where you can get to the grant system where you will need to do your application. First is down in this black grants box, there's a login button that'll take you to the system. Otherwise, on each of the pages for each grant program, there's a button there as well. So we'll go to the page for this grant program. Here's this Apply Now button right at the top of the page. You don't need to be applying to click this button. If you're just wanting to return to the system, it'll just take you to the login page. So on the web page here, what is available to you are the guidelines for this program specifically. It'll include most of the information that we have talked about today, our general grant guidelines that apply to all of the grant programs. Here we've got the application questions in an editable document if you'd like to write your draft in that Word document first and then paste your answers into the online application later, you can do that. That's available for you. The budget form you'll need to fill out is available here, although you can also access it in the application. Here are the criteria that the review panel will be using to score your grant when they read it after you've submitted it. And then here are some tutorials available on using that grant system. And finally, important dates. You've got your deadline, the earliest project start date, and then knowing when your grant is going to be reviewed. I see one more question come in. I am an art teacher and have had students ask if they can take summer classes from me through this program. Am I able to allow my name to be put in the teaching artist lists? So as I said, we don't actually have lists. We could probably connect people with artists if needed, but certainly your students could study with you over the summer. You just would need to provide resume and samples of your work like any other artist, mentor, or teacher would need to for this application. So we are going to go into the grant system. So if you had an account already, you would just log in there. Otherwise, it lets you create one. And if you weren't sure if you had an account or not, please check with us and we can let you know if you have one or need to create one. So when you log in, if you have been in the system before, you'll come to this dashboard page. And to get to new applications, you'll click this apply button. If you are coming into the system for the first time, you'll go directly to this application page. So you'll just need to scroll through to find the grant program that you're looking for. And if you want to just look at the application first without actually starting anything, you can hit this preview button here. Otherwise, you can hit apply and that'll start that application for you. So a couple of new buttons up at top here this year. We've got this copy previous answers button. If you click on that, you can choose from any previous applications you've done in here, and it will copy your answers over from the one that you chose into this new application for any questions that are the same in both applications. There's also this collaborate button. You can invite someone to work on the application with you. So you click the button, you will put in the email address of the person you are inviting, decide what permissions you'd like to give them. You can put a little message here saying, can you please read through this and let me know what you think? Or can you add samples of your work? You could say that to the artist that you're working with, and they could come in and add their own information. Then you just would click invite here. That'll send the person an email. They'll be able to, it'll just ask them to create a password. They don't have to create a full account. Though if at a later date they'd like to flesh out their account to a full account, they can do that. But then they will be able to come into the application and do whatever you needed them to do there. You will need a name for your project. This does not have to be anything fancy. It can just be the name of the workshop or camp you're attending, something like that. You'll put in how much you are requesting. You may want to wait until you filled out your budget form to fill in that amount. Here are links to those guidelines again that we talked about, along with the questions in a Word document. I'll point out here that you'll see in some of the questions we allow a lot of characters. We're not expecting you to come anywhere near that in your answers, so please don't feel like you need to fill up the whole field. We have that larger limit in case there's a question that you just really need to go into detail explaining something, but in general, the grant review panel appreciates nice, concise answers. And again, here's a link to the evaluation criteria that the review panelists will be using for your application. So you'll start out, enter in here what grade you'll be going into next fall. A reminder again, students need to be entering grades 5 through 12. Talk about the art form that you are working in and what kind of opportunity you want to take part in. Great to provide lots of details about where and how this will take place and who is involved. Here are your dates that we were talking about, your start date and end date. And then read through this section carefully. Depending on the kind of project that you're doing, you need to provide some different information. So if you're doing either a mentorship kind of situation or classes with just one instructor, In this box here, you can describe their qualifications, and if it's a class, information about the class. And then there's space to upload their resume below. If you are going to be attending a camp or workshop with multiple instructors, just provide information about the workshop as a whole, and you can upload a copy of a brochure or link to the website. You do not need to provide resumes in that case. So as I said, here's a website field where you can put in a website for that artist or camp or workshop, and then describe below what those websites are for. Again, if you're doing that mentorship option, we'll need to have samples of that artist's work, so they can upload files here or provide a website or YouTube link. They also will need to provide a letter of commitment saying that they are in fact agreeing to this project. The next section is all on the student's own work. So we ask the student to describe their past experience with this art form. How long have they been doing it? What kinds of activities have they participated in? Again, noting that it's better if the student has had some experience in that art form. Then here we have some upload fields for students to provide samples of their own work. There are some parameters here for what we're asking for different types of samples. And again, a spot for any links to, say, YouTube videos, for instance. This next section, we're just asking about some of the ways that you've challenged yourself in your art, and why you decided to take on those challenges, and then talking about the commitment to the project that you are requesting funds for. Why are you willing to commit a significant amount of time to this experience? Then looking at how this project will help the students' growth. We ask, as an artist, what are your strongest and weakest areas? And then what you expect to learn from this mentor or workshop that you are not learning now, and how this experience will address those strengths and weaknesses you mentioned above and help you grow as an artist. For this next part, for the outcome evaluation plan or goals and measurement, this year we are doing this in a new format that is actually statewide. It starts from the Minnesota Arts Goals that the Minnesota State Arts Board and all of the regional arts councils are working toward. And these arts outcomes are what they hope will result from these goals. So what you will need to do is, of these 13 goals listed here, choose 1 to 3 of those as the goals for your project. We ask that the applicants in this program choose number 8 as their main outcome, which is under arts education. Regional residents learn new arts skills and techniques. And then if you want, you can just choose that one, or you can add in a couple more if you'd like. So based on that outcome that you chose, you will have to list what specific changes you are hoping for yourself as an artist through this experience. And make sure that you're focusing on changes for yourself as the artist, not on how will this affect other participants in the workshop or audience members or your community. It really should be just focused on the student artist. Then you'll have to say how you plan to measure or prove that your goals have been met and those changes you were looking for have actually taken place. So here in this link, we've got an example of how that could work for you. We've got some examples of some different artistic disciplines. So in this one, they each just chose one of those outcomes, that number 8. And we'll use the visual art one as an example. So for the changes, they wanted to improve their watercolor skills, complete at least 3 watercolor paintings to show at a local exhibit, and learn how to prepare an art portfolio for applying to colleges or other art shows. So those were their changes. And then how they were going to measure would be having their mentor critique the watercolors that they finished, getting feedback from people who came to the exhibit, and having a plan for their portfolio. So this grid is just kind of to help you organize your thoughts to make sure you're including all the components. But then when you're actually answering the questions in the application, what you'll do is under that anticipated results question, list for each outcome you chose, the number, and then the changes section will go here. And then in the question about how will you know, that is where you put this, your information about how you will be measuring. I just see a question here. For 5th to 8th graders, can parents or teacher help them fill out the application? Definitely. We're not necessarily expecting the younger students to do this all on their own. Our next area here is the budget form. What you'll do, click this link and it will bring up an Excel document. So you will save this to your computer. In this cash cost section, just in these lines, you can itemize either here's how much the participation fees are, or list the cost of the supplies needed. That will total for you down here for your total cost of the project. And make sure to include truly the total cost and not just what you're expecting to receive through the grant. So here in this next part, you'll put how much you're requesting, and then if the total cost of your project was more than $500, you can list here where that other money is coming from. So once you complete this, you would save that. And then you can click this button. It'll bring up your little file window, and you can choose the file you'd like to upload here. If you ran out of some space to explain things in that budget form, there's a narrative field here for you as well. This next section has really no bearing on your application at all. It's just some data that we need to gather and pass on. So for the number of adult artists that are participating in the project, you would enter in the number of artists or instructors you plan to work with. For the adult audience, if you're planning to perform or exhibit your work, enter how many adults you expect to be your audience. And then for children and youth benefiting, you would certainly enter 1 for yourself. Or if you're planning to perform or exhibit your work, you would enter 1 for yourself plus how many children or youth you expect in the audience. For some of these, it tells you what to enter, but if not, click on one of the view codes links, and it'll bring up a window with your choices. So if you're going to be working on painting, you would choose 05D and then come back to your application and whoops, put that in there. And then finally, at the end of the application, we have signatures. You'll check this box saying that you certify all of the information that you entered here and that you meet the eligibility requirements. And then we need a student signature typed in. And then if the student is under 18, we'll also need a parent signature. So down at the bottom, you've got a couple choices here. We can save our application and then either keep working or return to it later, or you can hit submit when you're ready. For now, we are going to click save. When we do that, it just reminds us here are all of the questions that have not been answered yet. You can click continue. That'll take you right back to keep working on the application, but we're going to go back to the dashboard. And now here is this application that we just started. So to get back in to continue working on it, you'll just click edit application here. If you receive a grant, this is the same place you'll come back to find your contract and your final report form. And we are going to take another moment for questions. Not seeing any other questions at the moment, we will move on and just talk about some tips for your grant application process. It's a really good idea to start early before the deadline so you have time to gather everything you need. Make sure you have all the information on the study opportunity that you're going to be doing. Make sure you have plenty of time to get samples of your own work, get samples from the artists that you may be working with. So starting early is a good idea. Also, make sure to read those guidelines that we talked about earlier. Some of the questions in the application have more than one part, so make sure to read those carefully and answer each part of the question. We also already talked about keeping your answers nice and concise and clear. It's also good to assume that the grant reviewers don't know anything about you as an artist or the study opportunity that you're planning to attend. So make sure that both of those are well explained. Also good to have somebody proofread your application. If you're not sure about your project, still trying to figure out, not sure if this is the right application for you, just give us a call here and we can talk to you about your project before you start an application. Or feel free to contact us anytime with questions while you're filling out the application. If you contact us up to about 2 weeks before the deadline, we can read through your application for you before you submit it, let you know if there's anything missing, anything that you didn't answer in quite the way we were intending the question, things like that. If it is within 2 weeks coming up to the deadline, we can't guarantee that we are able to take a look at it, but it is quite possible that we will be able to. So after you submit your application, the Southwest Minnesota Arts Council staff will review it for eligibility and completeness. At that stage, if there's something that you're missing, you will be given 48 hours to provide that information. After that stage, all of the applications will go on to a panel of people from around this region who will discuss and score the applications based on the criteria for this program that we'll look at in a minute. And then after that, our board of directors will determine final funding based on the recommendations of that grant review panel. So the criteria that they'll be using for this program, they'll first look at the overall excellence of work and demonstration of talent. So those samples of your work that you can upload and attach into the application are very important. That is worth 18 points of your score. Then they are looking for evidence of serious commitment for 10 points. The project's contribution to the student's artistic growth for 10 points, and then your outcome evaluation plan for 3 points. If your grant is awarded, you'll need to do an online contract. You have about a month to do that. After you complete your contract, you'll first get just 80% of your grant award before your start date, and then you'll receive the remaining 20% of your grant award after your project and final report are completed and approved. You'll need to acknowledge the grant on any publicity related to your grant project. For most student projects, this is not going to apply. It would just be, again, in that situation where if you were putting on your own show at the end of your project and you were advertising your show, you would need to include that grant credit line. Then after your project is done, you have 60 days after the project end date to submit a final report. And it's a good idea to look through that final report when you're first getting started on your project, just so you know what information you'll need to gather during the project. So if you have any questions, we are in our office in Marshall Monday through Friday, 8 to 4:30. There's not always someone here over the lunch hour. And also we are traveling around a bit, so it's a good idea to just give a call to make sure the person you need to talk to is in the office if you're planning to drop in. Otherwise, you can give us a call or email us with any questions. I'm going to open everything up again and stay on the line if there are any questions or anything else you would like to talk about. If there are no questions, thanks for joining us today, and we hope to hear from you. Thank you.